from the Simply Novel team, and today for First Chapter Friday we are reading Maniac Magee by Jerry Spinelli. Let's start with the back. He wasn't born with the name Maniac Magee. His real name was Jeffrey Lionel Magee, but when his parents died and his life changed, so did his name. Maniac Magee was a legend. Kids were always talking about how fast he could run, how high he could jump, how no knot would stay knotted once he began to untie it. But the thing Maniac Magee was best known for is what he did for the kids from the Black East End and those from the White West End of Two Mills. Maniac Magee was special, and this is his story. All right, let's start with Chapter 1. Before the story. They say Maniac Magee was born in a dump. They say his stomach was a cereal box and his heart a sofa spring. They say he kept an 8-inch cockroach on a leash and that the rats stood guard over him while he slept. They say if you knew he was coming and you sprinkled salt on the ground and he ran over it within 2 or 3 blocks, he would be as slow as everybody else. They say. What's true? What's myth? It's hard to know. Finsterwald's gone now, yet even today you'll never find a kid sitting on the steps where he once lived. The Little League field is still there, and the band show. Cobble's Corner still stands at the corner of Hector and Birch, and if you ask the man behind the counter, he'll take the clump of string out of a drawer and let you see it. Grade school girls in Two Mills still jump rope and chant, Maniac, Maniac, he's so cool. Maniac, Maniac, don't go to school. Runs all night, runs all right. Maniac, Maniac, kiss the bull. And sometimes the girl holding one end of the rope is from the west side of Hector, and the girl on the other end is from the east side. And if you're looking for Maniac Magee's legacy or monument, that's as good as any, even if it really wasn't a bull. But that's okay, because the history of a kid is 1 part fact, 2 parts legend, and 3 parts snowball. And if you want to know what it was like back when Maniac Magee roamed these parts, well, just run your hand under your movie seat and be very, very careful not to let the facts get mixed up with the truth. Part 1. Chapter 1. Maniac Magee was not born in a dump. He was born in a house, a pretty ordinary house, right across the river from here in Bridgeport. And he had regular parents, a mother and a father, but not for long. One day his parents left him with a sitter and took the P&W high-speed trolley into the city. On the way back home, they were on board when the P&W had its famous crash, when the motorman was drunk and took the high trestle over the Schuylkill River at 60 miles an hour, and the whole caboodle took a swan dive into the water. And just like that, Maniac was an orphan. He was 3 years old. Of course, to be accurate, he wasn't really Maniac then. He was Jeffrey Lionel Magee. Little Jeffrey was shipped off to his nearest relatives, Aunt Dot and Uncle Dan. They lived in Hollidaysburg in the western part of Pennsylvania. Aunt Dot and Uncle Dan hated each other, but because they were strict Catholics, they wouldn't get a divorce. Around the time Jeffrey arrived, they stopped talking to each other. Then they stopped sharing. Pretty soon, there were 2 of everything in the house. 2 bathrooms, 2 TVs, 2 refrigerators, 2 toasters. If it were possible, they would have had 2 Jeffreys. As it was, they split him up the best they could. For instance, he would eat dinner with Aunt Dot on Monday and Uncle Dan on Tuesday, and so on. 8 years of that. Then came the night of the spring musicale at Jeffrey's school. He was in the chorus. There was only 1 show in 1 auditorium, so Aunt Dot and Uncle Dan were forced to share at least that much. Aunt Dot sat on one side, Uncle Dan on the other. Jeffrey probably started screaming from the start of the song, which was Talk to the Animals, but nobody knew it because he was drowned out by all the other voices. Then the music ended, and Jeffrey went right on screaming. His face was bright red by now, his neck bulging. The music director faced the singers, frozen with his arms still raised, and the audience faces began to change. There was a quick smatter of giggling by some people who figured the screaming kid was part of the show, some funny animal maybe. Then the giggling stopped, and eyes started to shift and heads started to turn, because now everybody could see that this wasn't part of the show, that little Jeffrey Magee wasn't supposed to be up there on the risers pointing to his aunt and uncle bellowing out from the midst of the chorus, Talk, talk, will ya? Talk, talk, talk. No one knew it then, but it was the birth scream of a legend. And that's when the running started. 3 springy steps down from the risers, girls in pastel dresses screaming, the music director lunging, a leap from the stage, out the side door, and into the starry, sweet onion grass smelling night. Never again to return to the house of 2 toasters. Never again to return to school. All right, chapter 2 is only 2 pages, so I will read chapter 2 real quick. Everybody knows that Maniac Magee, then Jeffrey, started out in Hollidaysburg and wound up in 2 Mills. The question is, what took him so long? And what did he do all along the way? Sure, 200 miles is a long way, especially in foot, but the year it took him to cover it was about 51 weeks more than he needed, figuring the way he could run, even then. The legend doesn't have the answer. That's why this period is known as the lost year. And another question, why did he stay here? Why 2 Mills? Of course, there's the obvious answer that sitting right across from Schuylkill is Bridgeport, where he was born. Yet, there are other theories. Some say he got tired of running. Some say it was the butterscotch crumpets. And some say he only intended to pause here, but that he stayed because he was so happy to make a friend. If you listen to everybody who claims to have seen Jeffrey Maniac Magee that first day, there must have been 10,000 people in a parade of fire trucks waiting for him at the town limits. Don't believe it. A couple of people truly remember, and here's what they saw. A scraggly little kid jogging toward them, the soles of both sneakers hanging by their hinges and flopping open like dog tongues each time they came up from the pavement. But it was something they heard that made him stick in their minds all these years. As he passed them, he said, "Hi." Just that. Hi. And he was gone. They stopped, they blinked, they turned, they stared after him. They wondered, do I know that kid? Because people just didn't say that to strangers out of the blue. Okay, so that is the first 2 chapters of Maniac Magee. So teachers, check out the links below.